for a constructive tomorrow, better known as CFACT. CFACT.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Welcome back to the program, my good friend Joe Trotter, and my neighbor too. Joe, it's great to have you back on the show. You've changed jobs since we last had you on the show.
Yes, I have, and thank you for having me. It's been a little bit. Last time I was at the American Legislative Exchange Council, and now I'm working with this great group of people called Texans for Clean Water, working on basically anti-litter efforts.
That's great, and you have been doing a lot with them, hitting the ground running since you joined them, and you introduced me to some of your colleagues. I think it was at the ALEC conference, maybe in DC. I think that's where I met one of your associates.
Yep.
One of your now associates, rather, and she was very nice and lovely. And you guys have done, you'll go more into detail, but through that, you were able to do trips to my ancestral homeland, Lithuania. You went to Germany
and Lithuania to take a look at their recycling practices and essentially how they keep their streams and waterways clean. It's kind of cool stuff.
What does America get wrong about littering? Because I feel like we've been force-fed this notion you have to recycle, you have to clean stuff, and nobody likes runoff and debris. And you and I live in southern Fairfax County, Virginia. We live in a very, very beautiful spot close to the Potomac River. And I don't see much of debris, but further north, more upstream in the Potomac portion, closer to DC and in Old Town Alexandria, there's so much debris and runoff, even though there are signs everywhere in the city that say, no dumping of this, please recycle, don't litter, do this, but people still do this. So what do people get wrong?
People still do this, but we're going to take a real, a step back here. So part of the reason the problem isn't as big in the area in which we live is there are just groups of dedicated people who are out there making sure that litter and debris aren't winding up in our local waterways. So I'm not sure about you, but we don't actually have an HOA in our area.
I don't either.
Yes.
In my corner, a few miles away from their house.
But it's a group of people who looked at what was one of the most polluted waterways in the DC area and said, this is disgusting, let's not make it happen. So this group got together, and between all of them, they funded litter traps and debris traps at the headwaters of the creek that's in our area. And I hesitate to call it a creek because most of the time it looks like a pretty big river. But these folks went ahead and put the traps in and pull out, half a bag or a bag of garbage every week from the traps. So that's how the litter and debris isn't winding up in our particular waterway. And I think it's super cool that it was just, a voluntary coming together, citizen-led initiative, and it provides a lot of hope. But that's, our one local area. Mm-hmm. And you have other areas upstream, downstream, in the Potomac watershed where they may not be doing that. So.
No, and there are PCBs. I think further downstream there's still the threat of PCBs in the water, which is why they tell you do not eat the fish.
Yep.
In the 50-mile stretch from DC, and within that, maybe towards Fredericksburg, don't eat the fish whatsoever in any of the Potomac watershed.
Yeah, unless it's a snakehead.
Yes, snakehead are immune, I guess.
But and we have some cool fishing out here. The area where we're at is just, I'm not the biggest fisherman in the world. I love fish, but
it's a good bass fishery.
It is
in the creek where we're close to.
Not just a good, it is the best. Supposedly, when they hold tournaments around here, I'm told that largemouth bass in particular, this is where the record-setting ones are found. And I've seen some fish out there. I kayak a lot out here, but every now and then. Actually, I think it was a couple of months ago I was out, and a couple of kids were out, and it was a beautiful afternoon. One of them had just a little Barbie rod, one of those kids' Barbie rods, pulled out just one of the probably the biggest bass I've ever seen in my life.
It's always the unsuspecting rods, the girly Barbie rods or like the Power Ranger rod, and they always hook in the biggest bass.
Yeah, it was crazy seeing these kids. They were probably like 12, 13, had a little Barbie rod, pulls out this just enormous fish. I'm like, nobody is going to believe me. And
did you snap a picture?
I'm not going to snap photos.
Yeah, no. I wouldn't. No. I'm saying like of the fish, not of the kids. You want to respect their privacy, but like at least evidence of the fish on the line.
Well, the kids were snapping their own photos, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. So there's great fishing around here, and you're not seeing litter. One of the things I used to deal with around here was cleaning up tires and things like that. By the time I moved into this particular area, the local community really had it well in hand. But that's not universal. This is like kind of a best case scenario here where people do it. So what we're looking at in Texans for Clean Water, there's a whole lot of clean water issues, like a ton. We're aiming somewhat basic here and just attacking the litter problem in particular, because it's something that's gotten worse over the last decade and a half. So you had big campaigns in Texas and elsewhere, like, oh, let's keep America beautiful, or let's, I didn't actually know this until I started with the group, but Don't Mess with Texas was an anti-litter campaign.
Was it really?
Yes.
I thought it was just a regular tagline because they're so independent driven.
Yeah,
as a republic.
I thought so too, but it turns out it was actually developed as an anti-litter campaign.
I did not know that.
Don't mess with us and throw your stuff out of the car window, or don't leave, trash bags on the side of the road. So that's how it started, and it worked really well for a long time. It's not working quite as well these days.
That's fascinating. Well, could you contextualize the litter problem? Granted, we have problems here in the United States, but I feel like other countries far surpass us as even worse despoilers and worse actors in this space, because they don't have, I'm not saying like all regulations are good, but we have a regime, I wouldn't say regulations, but we have kind of like a culture and guarded by standards. Some could be manifested as regulations or some basic standards. We seem to care a lot more about our surroundings because we're more prosperous, and when you're more prosperous, you can afford to care about your surroundings, and you should, because you have the ability to do so. I've noticed, I guess, in more impoverished countries, they don't have that same luxury, which is why they allow certain environmental problems to flourish. But would you say that even with problems, in your understanding here in the United States, like we still are more superior to other countries who don't have a handle on this?
Well, so that's kind of the wild thing is when you look at, especially at the first world, we are not doing well compared to other countries.
Is that so? Huh.
Oh, yeah. So when you look at, I'm going to use Germany and Lithuania as examples here. They use a bottle deposit system where you pay, you give a little money with each bottle or can that you buy, and then you get it back when you turn that back in. And it's an interesting system. It's not just, or at least these days with technological advancement, it's not just, you have to go back to the store you bought it from and, they hand you your exact money back. What they do now is they have these really cool things called reverse vending machines, where you can put in, a whole batch and get the money back wholesale. You can have it go directly to your bank account. You can have it wind up as, a gift card, and people will actually offer like discounts if you buy their gift cards through the system. I forget if it's Germany or Lithuania. They have their own national lottery if you want to deal with it, where if you do it through the reverse vending machines, you have a much higher chance of actually winning the lottery.
Interesting.
Yeah, they give you like 2 numbers as opposed to 1 if you do it through that system. And so when we were out there, you did not see a can or a bottle on the street anywhere. And just kind of as an entirely non-scientific experiment, I bought a bunch of soda because that's one of my vices. And after I was done, I would leave the bottle, walk about 30 feet away, and time how long it took for that bottle to disappear. The longest it ever took was 11 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. Disappeared, and
Was this in Germany or Lithuania?
Oh gosh, at that point I was in Lithuania.
Okay, you were probably in Vilnius.
I was,
yeah.
But I stuck it on the edge of a trash can about. We were kind of close to one of the reverse vending machines at the time, but yeah, the shortest was like 3 seconds.
Wow.
The longest was 11. It was just like when you went ahead and you looked at the streams and the rivers going through the area, there was no bottle litter at all.
I didn't see any when I went to Vilnius last summer. No, it was very clean and pristine. And just this week, actually yesterday, there was footage in central Vilnius of a moose swimming in the river.
Yeah. I mean, it's great, and they've got a handle on it. And so this is a system that has worked overseas. In the areas where there is a bottle deposit system in the U.S., it has worked to keep the litter out of the streams. It has not necessarily been the way it's been implemented has not necessarily been the best.
Where do they have this here in the States?
So for the most part, you're looking at fairly liberal areas. You're looking at New York, Connecticut, Oregon, places like that. But you also have it in Idaho. And actually, one of the really interesting things is, especially in Oregon used to be a pretty red, if not deep red area. And so the bottle deposit system actually came about there through the Republican Party. And so Oregon has the absolute best recycling rate in the nation. It has gotten as high as an 86% return on each of the bottles. And so, 100 go out, 86 come back. And the way they've dealt with it there, you can, the program, you don't even need to put it in a reverse vending machine. They have a program where you have a green bag that you put your bottles in and basically put that on your curb on trash day. And you've got your own little QR code that you can put on there if you want. And what that does, that bag gets, sorted, counted, and that money just goes back to whatever you want, whether it's, again, just the cash return, or interestingly, they even do it for charities, like the money can go straight to charities, or even your kid's 529 plan.
Very fascinating. And yes, we often chide Europe, but I think certain countries like Lithuania does a lot of stuff actually pretty good with the environment. They're not so, I wouldn't say woke, because woke doesn't really exist in former Soviet blocs nations, but they're conscious enough where they're not like people here in the center left or the radical environmentalists here. Like even in Poland or the rest of the Baltics, like Central Eastern Europe, they're conscious because they just know, like, you need to have clean surroundings. They remember from their Soviet occupiers, there was not really much of clean surroundings with central planning. So now that they're free, as they become more prosperous, 30 years plus after Soviet brutality and occupation, they have an incentive to care, I think. So that could go into it.
They do, but there's also, basically, it's sort of the tack we're taking here, and it's largely the reason that I'm so happy to be working with this group, is it's not just cleaning up the environment. It's also a domestic supply chain issue.
Speak more to it, please.
So when you, we're going to go with aluminum first. So aluminum, even a year ago, was about, I think it was $1,200 or $1,300 a ton in scrap value. That amount in the U.S. has gone up to closer to $1,700 a ton, and aluminum is infinitely recyclable. And unfortunately, we do not produce a whole lot of virgin aluminum in the United States. It's, less than 10% of what we use. We get our virgin aluminum from Canada, which usually great, even though our relationship might not be the best today. But we also get it from China, Jamaica, kind of a throwaway there, but and Russia. So
weird.
We're getting a lot of this stuff from overseas with people who we might not have the most friendly relationship with, and yet when it comes to like especially cans, a lot of this winds up in a landfill or on the side of the road. And when it winds up on the side of the road, it gets, the rain happens, it goes down a drain, eventually winds up in a waterway. And so, and it's not just aluminum, glass, plastic. The United States imports a whole lot of what would otherwise be considered trash because we do not do enough domestic collections to keep up with the demand for recycled products. And recycled products, we're doing audio here, but the rug over there is made with fibers, like non-natural fibers. Most rugs are made of this type are made of just recycled plastic. Or a lot of this goes into clothes. It goes into other beverage containers. So having the domestic circularity, the capacity for it to just have all of this stuff without absolutely needing to rely on foreign sources, there's even a bit of a national security implication here. Like, what happens if, say, the Pacific routes wind up not being great for shipping traffic? Our own ability to produce this stuff and maintain this stuff in the United States is huge. And with Texas in particular, there is no state that has more aluminum cans in the landfills. It doesn't necessarily have the highest throwaway rate, but it is one of the biggest states in the nation. So the sheer tonnage of aluminum that winds up in landfills when it could be turned into something valuable, drive down prices on other consumer goods. Most people don't know this, but even the cores of power lines that are made today, people think, oh, it's copper. At least that's what I thought until I was corrected here. The core is aluminum, and it's surrounded by copper. So aluminum has just become so much more valuable that we're losing just tens, hundreds of millions of dollars of value here to the landfills and our streams and oceans. And that's kind of crazy to me, especially when we're importing foreign trash, which is even more nuts.
Yeah, that is preposterous. I want you to speak more to Texans for Clean Water, the founder of the organization, and some of the technology you guys are using to actually clean up waterways, specifically in Texas. So could you speak to that?
Yes. So we have this wonderful, wonderful man who grew up in rural Appalachia. Absolutely brilliant guy, wound up becoming a mechanical engineer, had invented some really cool stuff that has, I'm not going to get too deep into that, but suffice to say it's probably impacted your life in one way or another, who got into real estate and was down in the Houston area and along Buffalo Bayou. And Buffalo Bayou is, for the most part, just beautiful. It's a really cool place, but built his dream home out on the water, and he was seeing, as much, if not more, trash flow by, especially after it rained, than the water, and thought it was kind of insane. So he worked and basically took, the street cleaners with the vacuums. He took a look at that technology and adapted it to put it on a powered barge that goes out 5 days a week in Buffalo Bayou and in the port of Houston, sucking trash out of the water. And he did this and he's been doing this for many, many years, but after 15 years of just having this mission to directly clean up the bayou, the trash kept coming, absolutely kept coming. And this is just trash that was on the top of the waterways. I mean, you don't want to see what the bottom looks like. So he started Texans for Clean Water, and basically we're working now to not take the exact same system that you would see in California or New York. Those states have done what they do to things that start out well. You've got places like California in particular, when you bring your bottle back, actually charges you a sales tax saying that you sold it back. So thereafter they're cut. But what Texans for Clean Water is doing is saying, hey, how can we make an industry and a producer forward and led way of making this happen without it becoming a giant government bureaucratic program. And so the bill that we push, this year it was Texas House Bill 2048 or Senate Bill 728, basically goes ahead and if passed, it would allow the producers of bottles and cans to form an organization under which they could work together to set standards for essentially getting this material back in the stream of commerce. So we actually got pretty far this year. We had a hearing in the Senate, then we had a hearing in the House. It passed the House Environmental Regulation Committee. It got to the Calendars Committee. It was placed on the calendar, the Texas House calendar. Unfortunately, Texas only meets every other year for only a few months, and the deadline was the deadline basically passed before they were able to vote on our bill. And it was something like 82% or 83% of bills in the House never actually made it to the House floor. But we were really happy to see that there was just a great group of people supporting this. And it was both sides of the aisle. We had hardcore conservatives. We had, well, at least the Texas version of, environmental leftists. And they all came together and supported this. We had, the International Bottled Water Association was on board with this. The Red Bull actually endorsed it.
Really?
Yeah, which was pretty cool. Dow Chemical actually put a card in favor of this. So it was cool to see so many people and so many groups and so many industries who were just like, yeah, this is a, not just an environmental problem, but a domestic sourcing problem. And we're happy that it got this far. We're looking forward to hopefully seeing it cross the governor's desk in 2027.
Yeah, the legislative process, it requires baby steps, and every state is very different. So that's interesting and fascinating. You guys have amassed support and awareness for the issue, because I think a lot of people think of the cause of clean water, and clean water shouldn't be politicized, but politically it's always been associated with the far left or Democrats. And there have been some Republicans who've taken the clean water mantle too. Mm-hmm. And it's like kind of a lefty light version. But I support clean water. I do, because I'm an angler, and I think everyone should, because for a drinking source, for recreational enjoyment, you don't want to see silt in the water. You want to see pristine, clear, translucent blue water. It's not always possible in the high sediment areas where there's a lot of runoff as well. But everyone wants clean water. I don't see that being controversial. But do you think your organization could help depoliticize the clean water issue? Because it has been so politically charged forever.
It has. And it's kind of funny, because the clean water issues were essentially born out of conservatism. I mean, you don't have conservation without conservatism there. And if you take a look at the history, I mean, the EPA was founded by a
Nixon.
Republican, and I mean, the Oregon bill was, I think it was a Republican supermajority back in the day, or if not, it was pretty darn close. But I understand why there is why it's politicized, but at the same time, it's possible to take a look at it from both angles and both arrive at the same conclusion for different reasons. And at that point, we should be all working together for it. Now, today's politics, I'm not the oldest guy in the world, so I'm not quite sure how it was in the early 80s, late 70s, but today, it's just it's almost like one party has to be opposed to whatever the other party believes.
Contrarianism, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's just, since we have a binary political system, it's a shame to see things caught up here. Now, I've been so happy with what I've been hearing out of Lee Zeldin, for example. Just a great guy. He seems very committed to making sure our waterways wind up being clean. So it's good to see this happen. But when it comes, especially with the domestic supply chain issues, it's tariffs. I'm not going to get into the overall thing, but when it comes to tariffs, we are importing Chinese trash in order to make recycled goods. Those are being subject to the tariffs, and people are waking up to the fact that all sorts of things are more volatile when it comes to importation and overseas development. So it's been interesting watching people just say, we have this domestic supply, the capacity to use a domestic supply chain for recyclables, but now we need to make sure it actually gets to where it needs to go. So I have, strong hope for the future on this, and we're going to be carrying on the conversation at probably a bit more of an
at a higher level. Okay.
But,
that's very cool.
But that'll probably be more discussed the next time we chat.
Definitely. And of course, as those, things get in motion, we'll definitely have you back on to talk about that. But is there anything else that we have not touched upon with your new organization affiliation, or another takeaway that you hope people get away from this, or just encouraging people to take a look at what Texans for Clean Water is doing?
There will be more to come. Check out TexansForCleanWater.org, and we're ramping up our social media, and we're putting out videos of the teams that are out on the Buffalo Bayou, showing just every day what they are encountering. I mean, they're pulling basically a dumpster's worth of trash, once or twice a day, just either in a morning or an afternoon session out of the waterways there. And that's something that is being repeated throughout the nation. There are other excellent groups doing this work too, a lot of volunteer cleanups, but we need to be a little bit better. And the sort of last point, and I think it's kind of interesting about our bill. If you are old enough, you may remember turning in your cans for 5 cents in various parts of the country. And that went away, and most people don't really realize essentially how it went away. Go back in history a little bit and take a look at what the political and legal sphere was doing. It basically went away with the rise of antitrust laws. And so at its core, I'm not going to say it's a problem. Antitrust has, huge implications, and in a lot of sense it's good. But what happened is companies were no longer allowed to really just work together on something big, like making sure that there's this whole domestic supply stream. So what our bill aims to do is basically get government out of the way on this one issue, which is let the bottling industry, let the industries that have concerns when it comes to recycling work together, with oversight, of course, to make sure that they, as an entire industry, can go ahead and encourage people to, turn in what would otherwise wind up in a landfill. So this is an example of essentially getting the government out of the way of private industry, with the end result just happening to be like good environmental policy.
I think everyone can agree with that premise. Conservatives, people in the middle, independents, even some on the center left. I think more like the moderate Democrat type environmentalists, they understand, but it's really hard to reach the nethers of the far left environmental contingent because they're crazy rewilders. They'll never get, they think industry is horrible, they're not a partner, and I think it's good that industry is being involved, not because they're like, yes, please government, please regulate me, but I think they have a vested interest because they wouldn't be able to produce more, or maybe they would lose out on contracts, or just the negative perception of their company engaging in bad behaviors would trigger a downstream negative effect among the populace. Like, people react very much to, like, if a contamination happened, Administrator Zeldin, as you referenced just not long ago, I was not aware, and I used to go to school in San Diego. I was aware there was like some pollution, but I didn't realize the severity of the issue. And then he went there a few months into his tenure as EPA administrator and showed a light on it about Mexico just dumping stuff into the waterways that affect Imperial Beach, and even goes as upstream as Coronado Island. Didn't go to La Jolla, where I went to college, but Coronado Island was even becoming a little unsafe for beach access. I was like, this is crazy, like, in some of the most pristine, beautiful beaches. And I think people are saying that government can ignore these problems and invite more of them. We saw the Gold King mine spill under Obama. When a government contractor caused that, and it took them forever to clean up that 3 million gallon spill in Colorado.
They could ignore it. They could even cause it.
Yeah,
but
government is equally culpable in causing environmental problems. Like, people don't know that it's not just private actors. Like, sometimes even government causes problems, and they never are held to account. Depending upon the administration, or if it's a different kind of administration, they are. And this is my thoughts. This is not like putting Joe on the spot or anything of that sort. But government can create environmental problems. That it is very much so. Like central planning, Eastern Europe, absolutely. Soviet Union had the worst air conditions, water conditions. Now in Lithuania, for instance, they have the salmon back. This was unheard of when my parents were growing up in Soviet-occupied Lithuania. So the salmon are flourishing, and that's because government has largely moved out of the way. And here in the United States, you and I are both hunters. We love the outdoors. We have seen when government steps back a little bit, but still, you have some oversight and some collaborations with, public-private partnerships. When you let private individuals, nonprofits, states, and others get involved and lead the charge, you see recovery of imperiled species, you see water conditions improve, you see air quality improve, everything gets magnified and things get better with free market environmentalism or innovation.
Yeah, because at that point, people have an incentive to care.
Exactly.
It's their environment. Or in the case of the industries we work with, it's literally their bottom line on the line here to make sure that this works. And so having these, government will always have some sort of role when it comes to dealing with regulating the commons and things like that. But when you step back and let industry do its thing and let people do their thing, it kills me that this is less Texans for Clean Water, more some of the stuff I dealt with at ALEC. But when you take a look at even some of the wildfire stuff that was going on,
yes.
This is a huge issue. When you let essentially permits get in the way of just people doing good, it's understandable that you don't want people to do bad. That's so simple. But at the same time, when you create a regulatory regime solely aimed at that, and it winds up just impacting all the people who want to go out and do good, clear out, brush, do beach
live fuel
cleanups.
control.
Yeah. Conservatism has a huge role in environmentalism. That actually works.
It does, and speaking quickly to the forest management scenario, I remember reading a story a few years ago. Everyone is familiar with some of the really bad wildfires. Of course, there's so many in California, and they're maybe starting to come around and say, okay, this no-touch philosophy we had does not work because we're now inviting more high-intensity wildfires. I remember Grand Sherman, the famous sequoia tree, almost met its death. They covered it with foil blankets with all these beautiful ancient trees. 20% of them, 25% of them were wiped out in this 2021 wildfire. And I remember maybe midway through Biden's term, the National Park Service was in the process of replanting trees, which is under their obligation. And volunteers do this. Who was an obstacle to allowing them to plant trees to help furnish and to manage the live fuel. Radical environmental groups. It was maybe Sierra Club or NRDC or some actor like that. It's always an obstacle. And you even had obstacles to replanting trees that were burned down or having clearing or some sort of management. Proactive management doesn't necessarily mean cutting of trees. It also means proactive restoration projects too.
Yep.
Replanting, mechanical thinning, something of that nature to help bolster the forest quality. And so it proves to me that so-called well-intended environmentalists, I call them preservationists, sometimes, and largely in recent examples and case studies, will make things worse for people who want to do good, because they're like, we're going to stop to prevent permits being issued, we're going to stop to prevent any streamlining of a project, no forest restoration because we have to let everything be rewild.
There are people who claim to be environmentalists who are straight up just anti-human, but taking a look at what Texas has dealt with on this issue, and I love this example because it winds up actually dovetailing really nicely with the recycling stuff. Texas right now is looking at a measure that would go ahead and basically streamline an industry where these management groups in wildfire-prone areas can go in, pull out invasive species, pull out all this, not all, but the stuff that will burn in wildfires, and turn it into electricity.
Incredible.
Yeah. So they're starting to put together the framework for markets when it comes to biofuels. Wow. So pulling out all the stuff that is going to burn one way or another anyways, but proactively manage it and have it burn in essentially an incinerator that will generate electricity as opposed to burning all around people's homes. That's huge. That's the kind of thing that California should be looking at, and that these preservationists, as you put it, are trying to prevent.
Yeah, rewilders are not conservationists. We have to be very clear on that. And that's not to knock them. Maybe there are some well-intended people in that camp. But I've just found that thinking from the 60s, 70s is really detrimental to true conservation efforts, because they view every human impact, or human involvement more so, to be an impediment to progress, which is ridiculous, because you need human input to have a clean environment. You don't have to trade, sacrificing people for preserving or conserving the environment. You can have both interests represented in a meaningful fashion without having to advantage wildlife or nature above people, because
we're part of this world. We
should be
part of the ecosystem. We're part of the biome. If you go ahead and eliminate all human interaction with it, it invites problems. Yeah, that's going to invite more problems than just saying
overdevelopment. Yeah. Which I think a lot of people are against the notion of overdevelopment, or I like to use the example putting a Walmart in every corner, because if you develop every ounce of acre, that's not healthy either, and that's not slapping free enterprise. But in this country, we're still very cognizant of the fact that we need green spaces, we need blue mind, being at peace by some body of water, whether it's a lake, a stream, or the ocean. We do care about nature here, and because we're a very stress-prone country, we need to escape to go outdoors, and we like seeing greenery. We like seeing wildlife inhabit and flourish.
We like breathing air. And
why not?
Plants do that.
Yes. No, carbon is great. Carbon is wonderful. Highly underrated thing. So Joe, TexansForCleanWater.org is where people can follow. Where would you have a Twitter account still, right?
Yes, at the Trop Spot.
Perfect. And does Texans for Clean Water have social media?
We do. If you search Texans for Clean Water, we'll pop up.
Perfect. This has been an enlightening conversation, because you briefed me into the whole domestic supply chain side of your new line of work, and it's fascinating. And I think a lot of people will agree that, yes, we can beef up our operations. For many things, we have seeded our domestic supply chain, and I like free trade, of course, and I'm never going to abandon that position, but we did shrug a lot of our stuff, and I think and a lot of that will be brought back to the United States as the market demands it, because we see that China can weaponize the supply chains.
Yeah, and when it comes to certain things like processing bauxite into aluminum, that's going to be tough from a permitting perspective. However, again, recycling is pretty darn easy when it comes to things like aluminum. And I also want to give glass a shout out here. At the very core of all this, it's kind of the third order effects. If we go ahead and we keep this stuff here and we keep it in the circular economy, prices are going to go down. Glass is awesome in that if you already have a glass bottle...
I love drinking from glass bottles.
I do too. Well, it turns out glass bottles require less energy than just virgin glass to form into something.
Fascinating.
So a lot of those glass bottles actually wind up as fiberglass inside of, for home insulation.
Huh.
So you want to do things like help decrease the price of housing, go ahead and just recycle some glass. It's kind of this really simple, just way to improve the economy.
We can find shortcuts to fixing environmental problems, which, we've talked about this before, that people go through so many hoops to promote certain forms of clean energy, but you're taking more steps and you're not eliminating the so-called problem, and then you're actually producing far more unreliable energy that may have a worse footprint when you account for the land. So why not for litter and such? We also take a similar tactful approach.
Exactly.
Joe, it's been a pleasure. It's always fun to come to your place. I love coming to this side of our little corner of paradise of Northern Virginia, and I appreciate your efforts. I look forward to learning more about what Texans for Clean Water is doing, and come back anytime when you have an update.
I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.